Welcome back to another episode of our Eagle Perspective podcast. I'm Mike Siciliano, joined today by our esteemed head of schools, Mr. Rod Gilbert.
Hi, Mike.
It's good to see you.
It's good to see you too. Again,
yeah. It's been a little bit since we've sat down and done one of these.
It has been.
Yeah,
we've been a little busy.
Yeah. So I think one of the things we've done pretty regularly on the podcast is we've talked a little bit about educational philosophy.
Sure. Yeah.
We're going to delve into that today a little bit more and use some words and some terms, which I know you kind of geek out about a little bit.
I do. I'm a hired geek,
and
yes.
I'm going to pretend like I know them.
I want you just to do your best to pretend.
Okay, great. Yeah.
Your self-deprecating humor is impressive.
I mean, it's pretty easy for me to be self-deprecating, Rod. It just kind of happens naturally. So, let me start with, over the course of human history, I think there have been lots of different educational philosophies.
Tons, yeah.
And every so often it feels like, they either change or old ones come back.
Sure.
Or people like a term, so they define themselves using that term, whether it's true or not.
Right, exactly.
And I think there's a lot of that happening right now as people look at schools and schools are trying to sort of put themselves into categories. So so let's start with a couple.
Sure.
Let's start with your background first.
Okay.
How about that? So
that's good.
You spent, 15, 20 years?
I would say 20.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say about 24 years.
Okay, 24 years in
the classical Christian school movement.
So why don't we start, not for me, of course, but for some of the listeners. What is classical education?
Well, I would use the word classical Christian education.
Okay.
And I would say that without even going into a real theoretical definition, I think that the reason it's captured the hearts of so many parents across America is because they define it as a traditional view of the world that pays homage to the past to prepare kids for the future. And so I think that parents are often worried when they look at more progressivist education. It looks like that progressivist education is trying to destroy traditions. And so parents, especially in the homeschool movement, find assurance that if they find a model they can follow, it reminds them of their past, of our history's past, but it has the best sense of preparing them for the future. So I think that it's captivated hearts even when a lot of parents don't quite understand what it is.
Well, and I guess as a follow-up to that point, I think a lot of people hear classical, they think, does that mean, we're reading St. Augustine? Is it more of a philosophy in the way we teach? Is it all the above? I mean, what does it look like?
Okay, so I would I'll define it very simply. The school that I came from, Regent School of Austin.
Yeah.
When we got there in 2003, there were about 600 K-12 students. And when we left in 2018, there were just over 1,000. We maxed out. And over the course of 15 years, we became the largest classical Christian school in North America and the largest private school in the county, in Travis County. And the common thread was a phrase by a guy named Quintilian, who simply said, good education is the good man speaking well. So at Regents, everything K through 12 was around the ability to master oral and written communication and argumentation. And that's the crowning piece of the classical model, is being able to argue in a winsome way and win someone over to your opinion.
Yeah.
That is the essence of it. And so Regents was very specifically built as a K through 12 system that graduated rhetoricians who had a winsome ability to win an argument.
And I know you have a classical background because you use words like winsome more than anybody I know. I don't think anyone ever used that word.
And that's not from my classical background. That's actually from, no one ever uses that word. But my president of my seminary when I was 21 wrote a little pamphlet called Winsome Words for Willing Witnesses. And it was his little pamphlet on how to teach us young future preachers how to teach people about the gospel of Jesus Christ in a winsome, casual, affectionate way, not dogmatically.
Yeah. Okay.
So it comes from Dr. Allison, actually.
So I remember when you got hired,
Yeah.
and people, saw your classical background.
Oh, yeah.
And it was this big question. At the time, I think actually people were like a little bit concerned.
They were.
They were. Is he coming
and they
to
should have
turn-
been.
Yeah. Is he coming to turn Santa Fe into a classical school? It's interesting what a difference 7 years makes. I think now there's some people that are maybe more intrigued by that.
They are.
So what, another type of education or a word
Sure.
that we've used before sometimes is a Christian liberal arts education.
Right. That's
What
right.
is that? And what's the difference?
So when I interviewed here, Matt Hannon, your predecessor, taught me that this is Santa Fe Christian is built as a Christian liberal arts, and all of his experience, sort of general education when we went to college. You had your history classes, your language, your STEM, your science. I took physics, even though I was going into the business school. And so all of his experience at liberal arts undergrad in the first 2 years, which was more common than it is now. And so Matt explained to me when I was interviewing that that's what we are. We're a Christian liberal arts school, and that's what intrigued me. I had 24 years in classical Christian, but my belief was there was about an 80% overlap between Christian liberal arts at Santa Fe and what I did at Regents. And so it was sort of an intellectual pursuit for me to try something new. But besides my faith in Christ, the number one question that people asked the first 2 years with great suspicion was, are you going to make us classical?
So are there, maybe here's a crazy question.
Sure.
Between classical education or classical Christian education, Christian liberal arts, what's better?
What's better?
I mean, that's like, I think what a lot of parents are sort of like, they
Sure.
hear these terms
okay.
they're, I think actually schools are using the terms, which
Yeah.
may or may not be accurate.
Yeah, they may or may not be accurate. I'm not going to say which one's better. I would say that I absolutely love what Santa Fe Christian is, and I'm just passionately in love with it. It's a little different than what I had for my own children. Katie and Ryan experienced the full throttle of what classical Christian people call the trivium and the training toward becoming rhetoricians when they graduated. So it's a little bit of a different feel, but I don't think that's a better one than the other.
They're just different.
They're just
They have
different
strains.
But I think that if I were visiting schools, my grandson's now a toddler, if Katie had been assigned me to go check out 5 schools for him, what would I be looking for? Because I'm not necessarily looking for classical Christian, but there is an overlap that I think is really important.
Yeah.
And those things I think we could spend some time talking about.
I think some of the elements like
Yeah.
that you mentioned early on, tradition,
Yeah.
some of the logic and rhetoric
Yeah.
pieces, and there's in fact elements of that without making Santa Fe a quote classical school, asking questions that make us think about what we're
Sure.
teaching and how we're teaching.
Sure, and I think one of them is so the word perennialism. Okay, so that's a fancy sounding term. Everybody knows it, but you may not know it. So I have flowers in my front yard. I have some impatiens and little vincas. These are the little plants Angie and I get from Home Depot, and every spring we go get them. We put them in the potted plants. Right? We have those little ones, but those are called annuals. You have to replenish them every single year, then they die off. We also have a bed of irises that are bulbs. Those are called annuals. So, those are called perennials. I'm sorry. So we have annuals and perennials. Those come back every year. Mm-hmm. And so there's an entire world of the Christian education philosophy called perennialism. And I think that was the underbelly of what attracted Angie and I to the classical Christian movement when Katie was 5. We thought about homeschooling when she was a little 4 and 5-year-old, and we wanted to make sure we didn't miss something. And when we fell across this model, we realized there's a great conversation that's been going on since the beginning of time. The Bible is the common thread through all of history in the West, and you've added to it all these other stories of history that inspire. Sometimes we do awful things in our history past, but you do want to know your history past. You do want to know the literature of the history past. You want to know what's called the canon, or the major works of a civilization. And so we were enamored by it as young parents because we thought, we want Katie to join the great conversation of humanity. And that's what perennialism is. And progressivists don't give a flying flip about that. They reject the past, unfortunately, and they reject great literature from the past. So I think a family could go visit a school and evaluate it based on what great books do they read or not read. And if it's all modern books, I would say run from that school. I'm very passionate about that.
And I think, would it be fair to say, to describe you as whether it's a classical model or a liberal arts model or some other model, what's important to you, and I think maybe what's important to a lot of the families who are making these decisions is the true good and the beautiful is most likely found in tried and true things that have stood the test of time.
That's right.
More so than, whatever
modern pop stuff
fad is in fashion.
Yeah, the progressivist model, there are some good elements. The bad is it's so trendy that every 4 to 6 years there's some newfangled thing that we feel like we've got to adopt. And that comes from John Dewey believing that the classroom is a lab that must be experimented with. And he rejected, until late in life, he rejected the classical liberal arts model because he saw it as more like factoids for the elite. And I just totally disagree with him. I think he was wrong and did a lot of damage to America because of it.
Yeah. Now, if a cynical parent who heard that would say, does that mean that the classroom, it looks like it would look in 1890? Like you never try anything new. Right. You don't use any technology.
Right. Yeah. I do think that's why a lot of families were very concerned when I got hired. Like, what is it about the classical?
Are we going to graduate kids that don't know how to type?
Yeah. Are we Luddites? Are we anti-tech? And so that's a misnomer. But I think that the classical Christian movement has earned some of that criticism. And but if anybody ever visited Regents when I was there 15 years, they would have never asked those questions. We had we built out a laser optics lab. Of course, we had computers everywhere. We were specialized in STEM, and because we saw it as the liberal arts as well. Yeah. And so there's not. That's just a misnomer.
Right. And would you say there's actually very few schools that are 100% classical or 100%?
I think you'd have to go to Italy.
Okay.
And it'd have to be in Latin. So that's part of that overlap. When I was here, when I was interviewing, there's no Latin, there's no required logic and critical thinking in the middle school, and there's no required senior thesis in the high school. That was the overlap. Yeah. That was the non-overlap. And I'm fine with that, Yeah. For my two kids, Katie really took to Latin, and I think Ryan just was exhausted by the whole concept. Never, he ran from it as fast as he could. And so I think it's mixed. But to be a true traditional, true classical, it would be many years of Latin and Greek.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. And is the thinking there just that the same idea that it's so fundamental language, or is it that you're actually closer to the real meaning of the text?
You're closer to the real meaning of the text, much like in the Renaissance. The Renaissance was one of the phrases of the Renaissance in the Italy was ad fontes, back to the sources. It was a rediscovery of the ancient statues and the ancient art and the ancient literature and the old readings of Homer and Iliad and Odyssey and so on. And so the Renaissance was a hotbed in northern Italy of go back to the past and appreciate what you can. The Reformation that we know of as Luther, Calvin, Zwingli, they're just babies that grew out of the Renaissance. And so Luther, Calvin, they specialized in Latin and Greek and Hebrew. And it was a returning to be able to read the ancient sources in their original tongue out of appreciation.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. What are some other things parents should ask when they're looking at a school?
I would say I think there has to be a fundamental appreciation of the arts as well. And I think that some progressive schools do an okay job at it. I think we're very good at this, and I want us to get better at it. But the cultivation of beauty in the heart of a child, The cultivation of beauty results in an understanding of truth, goodness, and beauty, which ultimately leads them to Jesus Christ. And the world is filling them with the false, bad, and the ugly. The opposite is a school like ours. We specifically talk about beautiful things in the art classes, teaching about good behavior, teaching about absolute truth in Jesus Christ. And so if parents can't sense the true, good, and beautiful in the curriculum, then I would also run from that school. Mm-hmm. I think they'd be better off homeschooling under a tree with a couple of books than having their kids all day long in a school that accentuates the false, bad, and the ugly.
You've used the term progressivism a little
Sure.
bit, just since we're throwing all kinds of terms out there.
Sure.
What do you mean when you say that?
So that really was birthed out of John Dewey and out of his little book called, I think it was called Democracy and Education.
And this was middle 1800s, maybe, John Dewey, right?
After World War I.
Oh, okay. Gosh.
Yeah. He
Edit that part out that I said that. Okay, so
that's
this
okay.
was after World War I, of course.
Yes,
yeah,
of course.
Great.
He was going head to head with what he saw as the classical movement that wasn't practical, which he was right. They were losing the narrative by only being ancient. And his was about the practical arts, and it was about creating a workforce in the United States with practical skills to go out into the industrialized world. The good of it was it maybe created more practical thinking. The bad of it was it threw away a lot of the past. And I think a classic case to that is something like you could go through business schools for years and years and years without an understanding of history and ethics. And I think that's why you got Enron. Truth became what can we get away with rather than what is really truth in the corporate world. And so there's somewhat of a return to that of there is an ethic of morality that we have to cultivate.
In other words, if you focus purely on skills, those skills are going to exist without any context or without any true good and beautiful grounding.
Just look at the cultural rot of most universities. Everything's relative. Well, if everything's relative, then nothing's relative. The whole thing doesn't make any sense. Postmodernism itself is now eating itself in front of us.
Okay, so a couple times you've mentioned this overlap between classical education, liberal arts education. Could we get a little more specific about like what are the things that you would see in that overlap?
So let's do the lower grades.
Okay.
With Amanda Walker oversees our elementary school. We read great books that every child should read. We master the art of reading. We master the art of the English sentence. And the kids are cultivated in a sense of the English sentence is beautiful and something that they can master. So K through 2 is learning to read. 3 through 5 is reading to learn. That was the same sort of format we talked about at Regents. There was nothing new there. The difference is we don't add to it. At Regents, we had Latin in 3rd and 4th grade, and usually just overwhelm the kids. And so the overlap is the beauty of the English sentence, reading good books, and understanding the moral imagination that can be cultivated by reading good books, and a real appreciation for our historical roots. So that's the overlap in lower grades. Middle school, a little less so, but we've explored this year with an elective on logic, although we have a different name for it. I can't remember what it is. It was like critical thinking and something. But I think that Dr. DeVoe in the middle school is contemplating it may be that we may require that one day. What I told him, what I found at Regents was when the students took a whole year of logic in middle school, they loved the fallacies unit studies.
Yeah.
You know, ad hominem.
Straw man.
Yeah. Red herring and all that. They absolutely loved it as middle school students. They got lost in Aristotelian logic and truth tables and some of the harder jumps. So when Todd and I and Hannah talked about adding a logic elective, whatever they named it, I can't remember, I told them just focus on training the kids in fallacious thinking. And they picked a great curriculum for it. The class filled up, and we're going to pilot it for a year or two. I think it'll eventually may become a requirement here in the middle school, and I think the kids enjoy it.
Yeah.
So that's that. High school is a little bit different. I think we have great books that we read in the high school. There's a deep appreciation for tradition in our history department. The one element that's missing, that's different, is the traditional classical Christian school in today's world it ends with a crowning achievement called the senior thesis.
Right.
And so we don't have a senior thesis here. I don't anticipate one as long as I'm here.
Right.
It would be too much change. But we did the senior business project, which cultivates critical thinking skills, working with a group, marketing, public relations. So the overlap is we have a project in the senior year, and in the classical schools you have a project. The project there is just different. And so when Angie and when I was interviewing, I thought, okay, I really love the senior thesis approach. It would take 10 years to redesign the K-12 school here to make it happen. So I'm not even attempting to try to do that. I think it would be contradictory to the DNA. I think you and I both are going to accelerate the business model side of it. And that which I think is brilliant. And I think that's going to stem from the entrepreneurship side,
right?
Which I could have never done at Regents,
right?
This is why I'm having so much fun here.
Yeah, well, and I'd be a terrible podcast host if I didn't mention there is an episode on entrepreneurship that
I know.
could check out.
We did it like 2 years, 3 years ago,
and there are some fun conversations we're having about. I mean, that is something in our DNA that can also be sort of a culminating experience and use a lot of the skills, but also the thoughtfulness. And so, we're excited about that moving forward too. So one other question, maybe along this topic, I think, and this is just I'm newer to understanding classical education, and you've helped me with that.
Yeah.
But I think classical schools do a really good job of explaining their model and how it all lines up. And
they do.
It's true to form. It's very logical and clear. Can you speak to that?
Well, I'm glad you asked it. So, the trivium is like this little engine inside the whole classical Christian movement, and we don't have time to explain what that is. But when I moved here, I realized that the cohesion that Angie and I had felt for 24 years in that movement was lacking here. There was a aroma here at the school that I could sense there was an engine inside it. I just couldn't put my finger on it. And so I think that parents gravitate to a model that just makes sense. And when you could feel sort of like the fish bones of a fish that hold the whole thing together, it just gives a mom a sense of togetherness, and we're not going to miss anything. And so my responsibility since I moved here has been to go find that consistency that was already here. And so we now have a fully formed educational philosophy at the school that's based on the convictions in the prayer journal. And we now have this fully formed brochure that lays out the philosophy of the school to help the parents see that the thing that we are doing K through 12, it has deep cohesion to all that we're doing.
Yeah.
And so I've taken the value add of what I learned in the classical Christian model and applied that very practical way of explaining it in what we do here. And I'm very proud of it. Yeah.
And for people who are interested in it, that's available on our website.
Yeah, it's a hard copy brochure that Hannah fine-tuned with the team. And it's multiple pages laid out. It talks about age development theory. It talks about sort of why we read important books. And I think it's really good, and it gives me a real sense of cohesion myself as the head. The fact that we've put it on paper is huge. Most Christian schools don't have the robustness that we know.
I think from my perspective as having been involved with the school for a long time, there are certain things people have been able to sort of point to as it's really special. There's this, but kind of what has changed since you've come is being able to put words to the pieces of it that people couldn't really describe well,
right,
of what's special about this place.
Yeah, it was my real conviction when I moved here. If we don't do the discipline of really writing it down, parents don't know how to hold us accountable. I don't know how to train new teachers coming in. And so the educational philosophy document is now very robust, and it includes things like politics and faith, science and faith, great literature. Eventually, I want one on theology of the body through sports and PE, and so it's got a very deep, comprehensive sort of feel to it that Here's what I would say. I believe if a parent who really knows the classical model were to come look at that, they would feel the overlap and agree with the cohesion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anything else that if you were looking at a school, you would want to know?
Yeah, I remember I use the word winsome often, and people like to pick on me about it.
Yeah.
So
Well, is it people or is it just me that picks on you?
Others, but you
Okay.
do it the best.
Okay, well,
Yeah,
that's
you're
good.
the
That's a
best at
badge
it.
of honor.
It is. Okay, so I visit a lot of schools for various organizations, and one of the things I look for is the smile count per minute. And I know that sounds pretty silly, but it doesn't. At the end of the day, the curriculum is far less important than the human being that's in front of the kids. And if the teacher and coach loves being around that child, and that child senses advocacy and love and affection for that little human being, that little child will take risks, try hard things, fail and recover, because the adult in the front of the room genuinely loves them the way they are as a little 9-year-old. And if the adults do that very well, there are more smiles in the hallway, more smiles in carpool. And so we call it smile count. I actually work with an organization, and I might as well have a clicker in the hallway, and I can evaluate a school in 1 hour based on smile count.
Yeah.
And so if the teachers are trying to use the curriculum to build on the shoulders of children to fix Western civilization or to fix some huge social ill, the 9-year-olds don't know about the fight that's going on in the world right now, but they need to know that teacher absolutely loves them as a little child or as a strange 17-year-old. You know, you're a specialist with the teenagers. And that would be the absolute number one thing. Do the teachers demonstrate advocacy in such a way that produces a high smile count per minute?
Yeah, I love that answer, because I think as much as we can get wrapped up in these debates about the perfect educational doctrine or pedagogy, ultimately, it's the impact of the mentors on the students.
It is. I told a group of parents the other day in the group tour, I said, I know you're going to go see a bunch of things. We've got a whole lot of brochures. At the end of the day, I could run a Santa Fe education under the shade of that tree right there and an old chalkboard if I have the right teacher. And really nothing else matters. I can do it just as well with a great teacher. Yeah. They happen to have new, beautiful buildings and STEM labs and all that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, it's the advocacy of the teacher and that teacher's love for the child and the age group that they're in that matters.
Yeah. Well, that's a great place to end our discussion. Thank you so much for coming and sharing your expertise, educating me on words I probably should already know.
No, you don't need to know.
But really appreciate your time today.
Sure.
All right. Thank you. And thank you for listening and watching. If it's your first time you've watched one of our podcasts, you can find other episodes on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, elsewhere podcasts are available. You can watch our video podcasts on YouTube. We look forward to seeing you again soon.